So picture this. You've got a high-stakes standoff in one of the most critical waterways on the entire planet. The American president is demanding help from his allies. But those allies, some of our oldest friends, are basically saying, no. This is the story of a crisis that's really testing the very foundations of the Western alliance. We're going to break this down into 5 parts. First, we'll look at the crisis itself. Then, we'll get into the totally different reactions from the US and Europe, how that's putting a huge strain on their relationship, and finally, what it all could mean for the future of NATO. All right, so our story really kicks off in the Strait of Hormuz. And this little stretch of water, it's basically a lifeline for the entire global economy. I mean, just to give you a sense of the scale here, 1/5 of all global oil traffic has to funnel through this one single point. It's an absolutely critical route, especially for Europe. But here's the thing. Since this conflict flared up, Iran has essentially weaponized this waterway. They're using all these asymmetric tactics, drones, naval mines, super fast boats, to basically choke off this vital route. And that creates an immediate, very urgent threat to global security and, of course, to energy markets. And that, of course, brings us to the American response. President Trump didn't just see this as a military problem. He saw it as a loyalty test for his allies. This quote right here, it tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the mindset. The call for an international coalition, it was just as much about political posturing and finding out who was on his team as it was about any real military need. And this was not a gentle request, not at all. Trump launched this whole campaign of public pressure, using Twitter, using press conferences, to try and strong-arm his allies into action. The language got really aggressive, he called them cowards, and basically issued a diplomatic ultimatum. Get on board or we will remember this. So, did it work? Well, Europe didn't just fall in line. Instead, its leaders pushed back, and with a surprisingly unified voice. They wanted to de-escalate, not send in the military. And the refusal from European officials was incredibly direct. I mean, there was no ambiguity. They saw this as a conflict they didn't start, a conflict they didn't want, and they were making it crystal clear. We will not be participating in a military operation. And look, this wasn't just some knee-jerk reaction. As the New York Times broke it down, Europe's no was based on 4 really specific strategic points. They felt like they were being dragged into a war they had actively opposed, one that kicked off when the US pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, a deal Europe had fought to save. They argued this was way outside of NATO's job description, with a strategy they thought was bound to fail and could actually just make everything worse. So this very public disagreement, it started to reveal some much deeper cracks in that transatlantic relationship. And these are cracks that have honestly been forming for years. You could see the divide playing out so clearly in the US media. On one hand, you had CNN framing it as a major failure by Trump. On the other, Fox News was echoing the White House line, blaming the allies for not sharing the burden. The American public was essentially getting 2 completely different stories. And the sheer absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on pop culture either. Comedian Seth Meyers kind of nailed the dynamic, pointing out that after years of criticizing your allies, turning around and asking for their help seemed, well, a little weird. And this is the key. Experts agree this whole thing goes way beyond just one conflict. It's a fundamental crisis of trust. For years now, European and US priorities have just been drifting apart. I mean, think about the huge disagreements over the Iraq War, or their different approaches to handling Russia. This isn't just about Trump and Iran. It's really the boiling point of a long, slow breakdown in shared understanding. Now, to be fair, disagreements within NATO, they're nothing new. From the Suez Crisis back in the 50s to France literally pulling out of the military command in the 60s, the alliance has definitely weathered some serious storms before. So the real question is this time different? And that all leads to the biggest question of all. What does this crisis actually mean for the long-term health, for the future of the NATO alliance? Well, the experts are pretty divided. You've got one former defense official, Heine Klink, who sees this as just another blip, arguing that, hey, the alliance has survived worse. But then you have former diplomat Donald Jensen, who sees a much deeper geopolitical and even civilizational crisis, one that's supercharged by that profound lack of trust we were talking about. And a huge complicating factor here is Europe itself, right? This idea of a single unified Europe that can act as one, it's still kind of a question mark.
As the experts point out, the way things look from Madrid is very different from how they look from Warsaw, which makes a single, cohesive response incredibly difficult to pull off.
And of course, while the Western allies are arguing amongst themselves, you can bet other world powers are watching very, very closely. Someone like Vladimir Putin, for instance, is undoubtedly looking for ways to use this division to his advantage and maybe split the alliance even further. So that's the ultimate question we're left with. Is this just another rough patch for an old alliance? A blip that'll be forgotten in a few years? Or are we watching the very beginning of a permanent break? The answer to that is going to shape global security for decades to come.